The morning of September 2nd, 1945, Tokyo Bay. Commander Toshikazu Omei stands on the weathered teak deck of the USS Missouri, his dress uniform pressed but somehow feeling inadequate against the grey steel surrounding him. The air smells of salt and oil, and something else, the metallic scent of defeat. His eyes drift past the surrender ceremony preparations, past the gathered American admirals in their crisp whites, past the journalists with their flashbulbs, to the horizon. He begins counting: 1 carrier, 2, 5, 8, 12. 15 fleet carriers visible from where he stands, their grey hulls stretching across Tokyo Bay like a steel curtain. Each one displaces more than 30,000 tons. Each one carries enough aircraft to flatten a city. Each one represents something that his intelligence reports, his calculations, his carefully constructed mathematical models had insisted was impossible. Commander Omei had spent 3 years telling anyone who would listen that the Americans could not build fast fleet carriers at scale, that their shipyards, impressive as they were, could not overcome the fundamental limitations of complexity, skilled labour, and material science. That the Essex-Class carrier program announced with such fanfare in 1941 would produce perhaps 4 or 5 ships before industrial bottlenecks strangled the program. He had been catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. The question that haunts him as he watches his superiors prepare to sign away their nation's sovereignty is not how Japan lost the war. That answer is written in the burning ruins of Tokyo, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. The question is simpler and somehow more disturbing. How did the Americans build all these ships? If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. To understand why 24 fleet carriers seemed impossible, you must first understand what Japan knew about building such vessels and what they thought they knew about American capabilities. December 7th, 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor sends shockwaves through the American Pacific Fleet. 4 battleships sunk outright, 4 more damaged. The Arizona settles to the harbor bottom with over 1,000 men entombed inside her hull. The photographs that reach Tokyo show twisted metal, burning oil, and chaos. The Japanese Naval General Staff celebrates. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of the attack, does not. In a modest office in the Navy Ministry building in Tokyo, Lieutenant Commander Omei compiles his post-attack assessment. His report is not celebratory. Page after page of careful analysis leads to a conclusion that makes his superiors uncomfortable. The attack on Pearl Harbor, successful as it appears, may have struck the wrong targets. The American battleship fleet is obsolete, he writes. The future of naval warfare belongs to the aircraft carrier. Japan has 10 fleet carriers, the United States has 7. But America possesses something Japan cannot match: industrial capacity that operates on a scale Tokyo's planners struggle to comprehend. His report includes calculations, estimates of American steel production, assessments of shipyard capacity, projections of how quickly the United States could replace losses. The mathematics are sound. The conclusion is stark. If this war extends beyond 1 year, American industrial capacity will overwhelm us. They can replace every ship we sink. We cannot replace ours. Admiral Yamamoto reads the report. He has seen American industry firsthand during his years as a naval attaché in Washington and as a student at Harvard. He knows the automobile factories, the steel mills, the vast rail networks. His response to Omei's report becomes one of the war's most haunting prophecies. I shall run wild for the first 6 months or a year, but I have utterly no confidence for the second or third year. The clock begins ticking on December 7th, 1941. Japan has 6 months to win the war before American industry fully mobilizes. 6 months before the sleeping giant awakens. But what neither Yamamoto nor Omei fully grasps in December of 1941 is not just the scale of American production, but the nature of it. They are thinking in terms of how Japan builds carriers. They are about to learn that the United States builds them differently. A fleet carrier in 1941 represents the pinnacle of industrial complexity. Consider the specifications of what would become the Essex-Class, 888 feet in length, longer than 3 American football fields laid end to end. 27,000 tons displacement unloaded, swelling to 36,000 tons when fully equipped for combat operations. A crew of 3,448 men, a floating city requiring its own hospital, kitchens, machine shops, and even a post office. Each carrier requires 3 million individual parts fabricated to precise specifications. 22 miles of piping snake through its compartments carrying steam, water, fuel, and hydraulic fluid. 2,800 separate compartments must be made watertight. The armor belt alone, hardened steel plate protecting the vital machinery spaces, weighs thousands of tons and must be forged, transported, and installed with millimeter precision. The flight deck presents its own engineering challenges. It must be strong enough to support fully loaded aircraft weighing up to 15 tons, flexible enough to absorb the shock of controlled crashes, and smooth enough to allow safe landings in rough seas. Below the flight deck, the hangar deck must accommodate up to 90 aircraft, with elevators capable of lifting a fully armed dive bomber from hangar to flight deck in under a minute. The propulsion system alone represents a marvel of engineering. 4 steam turbines generating 150,000 shaft horsepower, driving 4 propeller shafts, pushing 36,000 tons of steel through water at speeds exceeding 33 knots. The fuel bunkers must carry enough oil to steam 6,000 miles at cruising speed. For Japan, building such a vessel requires mobilizing every major shipyard in the nation. The carrier Shokaku, completed in 1941, took 30 months from keel laying to commissioning. The even larger Shinano, converted from a battleship hull, would consume 4 years of labor and would sail for barely 10 days before an American submarine sent her to the bottom. In the early 1942, Japanese naval intelligence received reports that the Americans planned to build these ships not 1 or 2, but dozens in less than 2 years per vessel. The Intelligence Bureau analyzes these claims with the same careful methodology Omei had applied to his pre-war assessments. Their conclusion, filed in March of 1942, is unequivocal. The construction of fleet carriers on the scale and timeline reported is technically impossible given known American shipyard capacity, skilled labor requirements, and material constraints. The Americans are likely exaggerating their capabilities for propaganda purposes, or the reported vessels are of inferior quality, unsuitable for front-line operations. The report includes detailed calculations. An Essex-Class carrier requires approximately 5 million man-hours of skilled labor. American shipyards employ roughly 200,000 workers with the necessary skills. Assuming optimal efficiency and working exclusively on carrier construction, which would preclude building destroyers, submarines, and other necessary vessels, American yards could theoretically complete 1 carrier every 18 months. But optimal efficiency is impossible. Workers get sick, machinery breaks down, steel deliveries are delayed, and the Americans must build dozens of other ship types simultaneously. Factor in realistic efficiency rates, and the mathematics suggest America might complete 4 perhaps 5 Essex-Class carriers during the entire war. The Japanese calculations are thorough. They account for every known variable. They are based on sound engineering principles and accurate intelligence about American shipyard capacity. They are also completely wrong. The mistake lies not in the mathematics, but in the assumptions underlying those calculations. The Japanese analysts are calculating based on how Japan builds ships sequentially, from keel to commissioning, with each step dependent on the completion of the previous step. They assume American shipyards operate on the same principles, merely scaled up. They are about to learn that the Americans have fundamentally reimagined the process of building a warship. April 28, 1941, 7 months before Pearl Harbor. At the Newport News, shipbuilding and dry dock company in Virginia, workers begin laying the keel of a vessel designated CV-9, the Essex, the lead ship of her class, the first of what will become the Impossible Fleet. The pre-war planning for the Essex-Class reveals American strategic thinking that Japan's leaders fail to anticipate. While Japan is preparing for a short, decisive war that will force America to accept Japanese dominance in the Pacific, the United States Navy is designing ships for a long war of industrial attrition. The Essex-Class design prioritizes not just combat capability, but producibility. Every decision in the design phase considers how quickly and efficiently the ship can be built. Standardized components, modular construction, prefabrication of entire sections. The Essex-Class is designed from the beginning to be mass-produced. Mass production of a 30,000-ton warship. The concept seems absurd, yet even before Pearl Harbor, before America enters the war, the groundwork is being laid for an industrial mobilization unprecedented in human history. June 4th through 7th, 1942. The Battle of Midway. In 4 days of desperate combat, American dive bombers sink 4 Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Japan's first-line carrier strength is cut in half. These are not just ships. They are the veterans of Pearl Harbor, the Darwin Raid, the Indian Ocean operations. Their loss cannot be easily replaced. Japan's shipyards are already working at capacity. American losses at Midway, 1 fleet carrier, the Yorktown, torpedoed and sank slowly after surviving multiple bomb and torpedo hits. Devastating but replaceable. President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Emergency Shipbuilding Directive on June 25, 1942. The Essex-Class program receives Priority 1 status, the highest designation in American war production. Every resource necessary for carrier construction will be made available. Every bottleneck will be broken. Every impediment removed. The directive reaches Newport News in Virginia, the New York Naval Shipyard in Brooklyn, Bethlehem Steel's Fore River Shipyard in Massachusetts, the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Washington State. 7 major shipyards retool their operations for one purpose: build fleet carriers as fast as steel can be cut and welded. But the transformation extends far beyond the shipyards themselves. Across the American industrial landscape, factories begin converting to war production on a scale that staggers comprehension. In Detroit, automobile assembly lines that produced Fords, Chevrolets, and Chryslers shut down civilian production entirely. The factories retool for aircraft engines, tank transmissions, gun mounts. The workers who built family sedans now build weapons of war. General Motors alone will produce war materiel worth $12 billion by 1945, more than the entire economic output of Italy. Steel mills in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana run 24 hours a day. American steel production in 1941, 60 million tons. By 1943, 120 million tons. The increase alone, 60 million tons, exceeds Japan's total steel production capacity. Aluminum production increases even more dramatically. Light metal alloys for aircraft construction become a strategic priority. American aluminum production increases from 300,000 tons in 1941 to 1.8 million tons by 1943. Japan's peak aluminum production, 70,000 tons. The numbers tell a story Japan's planners never fully grasped. America is not trying to balance civilian and military production. The country is converting its entire economy into a war economy. But raw material production, impressive as it is, does not explain how 24 fleet carriers emerge from American shipyards in 40 months. The real revolution occurs in how those materials are transformed into warships. Newport News Shipbuilding, July 1942. The Essex is taking shape in Dry Dock 10, her keel laid, her frame rising. But something is different about how this ship is being built compared to traditional naval construction methods. Traditional Japanese approach to building a warship: construct the hull from keel upward, frame by frame, plate by plate. Install machinery as spaces become accessible. Add weapons systems. Install electronics. Each step follows the previous step in a strict sequence. The process is logical, orderly, and time-consuming. American approach: build the ship in hundreds of separate pieces simultaneously, then assemble them like a three-dimensional puzzle. At factories across Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, enormous sections of the Essex take shape far from the shipyard. Gun mounts weighing 40 tons are assembled, complete wiring, hydraulics, fire control systems, installed then transported by rail to Newport News. Entire compartments, 20 feet by 30 feet by 10 feet, are built as complete units with bulkheads, deck plating, piping, lighting, ventilation ducts all installed. These sections arrive at the shipyard, ready to be lifted by massive cranes and welded into place. The flight deck, traditionally built plate by plate over the hull structure, is instead fabricated in 10 enormous sections. Each section is built on land, flat, with all the arresting gear, catapult tracks, and deck plating installed. Then the sections are lifted onto the hull and welded together. What traditionally took 8 months takes 6 weeks. The electronic suites, radar, radio, navigation equipment are wired and tested in separate workshops, then installed as complete systems. The wiring harnesses alone, which would traditionally require electricians to run thousands of individual wires through the ship's compartments, are instead prefabricated. Entire sections of wiring, already routed and connected, are installed in hours rather than weeks. A worker named Dorothy Cole, employed at Bethlehem Steel's Quincy Shipyard in Massachusetts, later recalls, "We'd see these massive pieces arriving by rail from Pennsylvania, from Ohio, from factories we'd never heard of. Complete gun turrets, sections of hull with the compartments already built inside. You could look into them and see bunks, lighting, everything. We just had to lift them into place and weld them in. The Japanese were still hammering out individual hull plates while we were assembling finished sections. The workforce itself represents a revolution. With millions of men in uniform, American shipyards recruit women in unprecedented numbers. Rosie the Riveter is not just propaganda, it is a statistical reality. By 1943, women comprise 40% of shipyard workers. They weld, rivet, operate cranes, read blueprints, inspect welds, and do every job previously considered men's work. Training programs, which traditionally took years to produce skilled shipwrights, are compressed to months or weeks. The modular construction method allows for greater specialization. Workers become experts at one specific task, rather than needing to master all aspects of ship construction. Quality control inspectors ensure that each module meets specifications before installation. The result: construction time drops from 30 months to 20 months, then to 18 months, then to 16 months for later ships in the class. The Americans are not just building faster, they are learning how to build faster with each ship completed. Commander Omei receives the intelligence report in December of 1942. USS Essex, hull number CV-9, has been commissioned into the United States Navy. Construction time from keel to commissioning, 20 months. He studies the report carefully. The Essex displaces 36,000 tons fully loaded. She carries 90 aircraft. Her specifications match or exceed Japanese fleet carriers. This is not an inferior vessel rushed into service. This is a frontline warship of the highest quality. Omei's analysis: the Essex represents a one-time achievement. The Americans have concentrated their resources to produce a single ship quickly for propaganda purposes. They cannot maintain this pace. The complexity of fleet carrier construction, the skilled labor requirements, the demands on steel production, all ensure that future carriers will take longer to build as resources are stretched across multiple projects. His report to the Naval General Staff includes detailed calculations showing why sustained production is impossible. American steel output, even at increased production levels, cannot support building multiple fleet carriers simultaneously while also producing the destroyers, submarines, cruisers, and merchant vessels necessary for global operations. Material bottlenecks will slow production. Skilled labor shortages will develop. The Americans will need to choose which ship types to prioritize. The report concludes: expect 3 to 4 additional Essex-Class carriers by late 1943, with diminishing production thereafter as industrial constraints become binding. His mathematics is impeccable. His logic is sound. His understanding of industrial production is sophisticated and thorough. And he is wrong. Completely, utterly, catastrophically wrong. Because something is happening in America that has never happened before in human history. An entire continental economy is converting itself into a machine for producing war materiel, not partially, not gradually, totally and immediately. Civilian automobile production in America, 0 vehicles in 1943. Every automotive factory is building military equipment. Civilian radio production, halted. The factories build military radios. Civilian aircraft production, non-existent. Every aircraft factory builds warplanes. Refrigerator factories build ammunition. Typewriter companies manufacture gun components. Toy manufacturers stamp out compass casings. Rationing extends to virtually everything. Gasoline, meat, sugar, coffee, shoes, tires. Civilians make do with less, so that soldiers, sailors, and war workers can have more. The American gross domestic product increases by 70% between 1941 and 1944. Virtually all that increase goes to military production. And the workforce expands in ways Omei's calculations never accounted for. Women enter factories. African Americans migrate from the segregated South to industrial centers in the North and West, finding employment in war plants that previously excluded them. Older workers return from retirement. Teenagers work after school. The American industrial workforce grows from 46 million to 54 million between 1941 and 1943. The shipyards, Operate in 3 shifts, 24 hours per day. Arc welders create constellations of sparks in the darkness. Cranes swing enormous steel sections through the night. The hammering never stops. In dry docks along both coasts and the Gulf of Mexico, fleet carriers take shape with assembly line efficiency. January 21, 1943. USS Yorktown, hull number CV-10, second of the Essex-Class, is commissioned. Construction time, 19 months. April 15, 1943. USS Intrepid, CV-11. Construction time, 18 months. August 17, 1943. USS Hornet, CV-12. Construction time, 17 months. The ships keep coming, not 3 or 4 as O'May predicted, not slowing as industrial constraints bite, accelerating. Each shipyard learns from the previous ship, refining procedures, eliminating inefficiencies. What seemed impossible becomes routine. By the end of 1943, 9 Essex-Class carriers had been commissioned, 9 30,000-ton fleet carriers in 24 months. Japan's total carrier construction during the same period, 2 escort carriers. The statistical disparity becomes so extreme it verges on the absurd. But these are not statistics. These are ships. Real vessels with steel hulls and wooden decks, carrying real aircraft flown by real pilots, protected by real anti-aircraft guns manned by real crews. And they are coming across the Pacific in numbers that Japan cannot counter, cannot sink faster than they are built, cannot match with any industrial effort Japan can mount. Commander Omai tracks each new commissioning with growing horror. His reports to the Naval General Staff became increasingly dire. By mid-1943, the Americans have exceeded predicted production capacity. Recommend immediate escalation of carrier construction. By late 1943, American carrier production continues at an unsustainable pace. We must assume they are accepting inferior quality to maintain numbers. By early 1944, silence. The reports stop. The numbers speak for themselves. Japan's total carrier construction program from 1942 through 1945 produces 6 fleet carriers. The United States, during the same period, commissions 24 Essex-Class carriers alone, plus 9 Independence-class light carriers converted from cruiser hulls, plus over 100 escort carriers built on merchant ship designs. But raw numbers, staggering as they are, do not fully capture the nature of American industrial dominance. Because the Essex-Class carriers are not just numerous, they are better than what came before. The design incorporates lessons learned from earlier American carriers and from studying Japanese carrier operations. The result is a vessel more survivable, more capable, and more adaptable than any carrier previously built. Damage control represents perhaps the most critical improvement. Earlier, American carriers like the Lexington and Yorktown proved vulnerable to cascading damage. A single torpedo or bomb hit could trigger fires that spread uncontrollably, secondary explosions that gutted the ship, flooding that could not be contained. The Essex-Class design addresses these vulnerabilities systematically. The hull is divided into hundreds of watertight compartments. Damage to one section can be isolated, preventing flooding from spreading. Multiple redundant systems ensure that if one pump fails, others can take over. If one generator is destroyed, others continue providing power. The aviation fuel system incorporates a revolutionary safety feature. Fuel lines can be filled with inert carbon dioxide gas, preventing fuel vapors from igniting even if the lines are ruptured. Earlier carriers had burned because aviation fuel vapor, more explosive than the fuel itself, ignited from any spark. Fire suppression systems are distributed throughout the ship. Foam generators can blanket hangar decks in fire-retardant foam within minutes. Sprinkler systems activate automatically. Firefighting parties are trained to a level of proficiency that transforms damage control from desperate improvisation to systematic procedure. The armor scheme protects vital spaces without adding excessive weight. The machinery spaces, magazines, and aviation fuel tanks are surrounded by multiple layers of protection. The flight deck itself, while not armored like a British carrier, is designed to be rapidly repaired, even if heavily damaged. These design features are not theoretical. They will be tested in combat under the most severe conditions imaginable. March 19, 1945. USS Franklin, CV-13, operating off the coast of Japan as part of Task Force 58. The carrier has just completed arming and fueling 51 aircraft on her hangar deck for a strike mission against Japanese airfields on Kyushu. Fully armed and fueled aircraft represent the most dangerous possible moment bombs, rockets, torpedoes, and full fuel tanks, all concentrated in an enclosed space. At 7:08 in the morning, a single Japanese dive bomber penetrates the American Combat Air Patrol. The pilot releases two 500-pound bombs from low altitude. Both bombs hit Franklin. Both penetrate the wooden flight deck. Both detonate inside the hangar deck where the armed and fueled aircraft wait. The result is catastrophic. Bombs detonate, rockets ignite and tear through bulkheads. Torpedoes explode. Aviation fuel ignites, creating a firestorm. The Franklin's hangar deck becomes an inferno. Explosions rip through the ship. Men are incinerated instantly. Others are blown overboard. The carrier lists 13 degrees to starboard as firefighting water accumulates on one side. 724 men die in the first hour, the worst casualties ever suffered by a United States warship that survived the attack. Japanese intelligence, monitoring American radio, to traffic, reports that a fleet carrier has been mortally wounded. Post-war analysis will surely show she sank. No carrier could survive such damage. USS Franklin does not sink. The crew fights the fires for 5 hours before bringing them under control. The engineering department restarts the engines. Franklin makes way under her own power, achieving 14 knots despite massive damage. She sails 12,000 miles to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, arriving on April 28th. Repairs take 8 months. She returns to service. The Franklin survives because every damage control feature designed into the Essex-Class works as intended. Watertight doors contain flooding. Redundant systems provide power and pumping capacity even as entire sections are destroyed. The crew, trained to the highest standard, performs with extraordinary courage and discipline, and the ship herself, built with structural strength that seems excessive in peacetime, proves barely adequate for wartime survival. Compare this to Japanese carrier survivability. June 19th, 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The carrier Taiho, Japan's newest and most advanced fleet carrier, is struck by a single torpedo from the American submarine USS Albacore. The torpedo damages the hull, but does not immediately threaten the ship. However, aviation fuel lines rupture. Fuel vapors accumulate in the hangar deck and lower compartments. An inexperienced damage control officer orders ventilation fans turned on, hoping to clear the fumes. Instead, the fans distribute fuel vapor throughout the ship. 7 hours after the torpedo hit, the vapor ignited. The explosion guts the Taiho. She sinks within hours. Over 1,600 men die. A single torpedo, poor damage control, inadequate design. The newest Japanese carrier is destroyed by damage. An Essex-Class carrier would survive. This pattern repeats throughout the war. American carriers prove extraordinarily difficult to sink. USS Yorktown at Midway survives multiple bomb and torpedo hits, remaining afloat for 2 days before finally succumbing to submarine torpedoes. USS Hornet at Santa Cruz absorbs multiple bomb hits, kamikaze crashes, and torpedo hits before finally sinking, and even then, requires American destroyers to finish her off when she refuses to go down. Japanese carriers, despite their excellence in other areas, prove fragile. Wooden flight decks burn. Inadequate fire suppression allows small fires to become uncontrollable. Aviation fuel systems lack safety features. Damage control training is insufficient. The industrial capacity to build many carriers combines with design excellence to create resilience. America can afford to take risks because losses can be replaced. Japan cannot afford to lose any carrier, yet loses them more easily when hit. But ships alone do not fight wars. Each Essex-class carrier requires 90 to 100 aircraft. Each aircraft requires a pilot. And here, the disparity between American and Japanese capability becomes even more stark than in shipbuilding. Japan begins the war with the finest carrier pilots in the world. The pilots who attack Pearl Harbor, who dominate the early campaigns in the Pacific, average over 5,000 hours of flight time. They are superbly trained, experienced, and tactically skilled. They fly the Zero, an aircraft that can outmaneuver anything the Allies possess in 1941. But these pilots are irreplaceable. Japanese pilot training, which takes 24 months to produce a carrier-qualified aviator, cannot keep pace with combat losses. And the losses, from the beginning, are severe. At the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942, Japan lost 69 aircraft and their crews. At Midway in June, over 100 aircraft and pilots were lost when the 4 carriers sank. These losses represent not just machines, but highly trained specialists who cannot be quickly replaced. The Imperial Japanese Navy's training infrastructure cannot expand rapidly. Training carriers are in short supply. Fuel for training flights becomes scarce as Japan's oil situation deteriorates. Experienced instructors are pulled from training duties to fly combat missions. The training pipeline, already slow, becomes slower. By 1943, Japanese pilot training time dropped from 24 months to 18 months, then to 12 months, then to 6 months. By 1944, some pilots receive as little as 3 months of training before being assigned to frontline units. And for kamikaze pilots, those designated for suicide missions training is reduced to the absolute minimum required to take off and navigate to a target. They do not need to learn how to land. American pilot training, by contrast, expands and improves throughout the war. In 1941, carrier pilot training takes approximately 12 months. By 1943, training time increases to 30 months. Not because American pilots are slower learners, but because the training has become more comprehensive and sophisticated. American pilot trainees fly more hours before earning their wings than Japanese pilots flew in their entire training program. They train on multiple aircraft types. They practice gunnery until hitting targets becomes instinctive. They drill formation, flying, navigation, carrier landings, and combat tactics until these skills are automatic. And unlike Japan, America has no shortage of training resources. Fuel is abundant. Aircraft are abundant. Thousands of training aircraft roll off production lines, separate from combat aircraft production. Airfields are abundant. Instructors are abundant. Experienced combat pilots rotate home to train the next generation, passing on lessons learned over Japan and the Pacific Islands. The result: by 1944, the average American carrier pilot is better trained, more experienced, and flying superior aircraft than his Japanese opponent. The qualitative gap that favored Japan in 1941 has reversed completely. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Lieutenant Commander Alexander Vrasiu, a carrier pilot flying from USS Lexington, later recalled an engagement in June of 1944 during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. I could see them coming in Japanese planes in formation, but the formation was ragged, not tight like the formations we'd seen in 42, and the way they maneuvered when we engaged them. These weren't the guys who hit Pearl Harbor. These were kids. Brave kids, doing their best, but you could tell they hadn't had enough training. It was like watching someone who'd learned to drive last week trying to race against professionals. Vrasiu shot down 6 Japanese aircraft in 8 minutes during that engagement. He was not unique. Many American pilots achieved ace status, 5 or more aerial victories within months of reaching the combat zone. Japanese aces, those few who survived long enough to achieve such status, were vanishingly rare by 1944. The Americans were not building just carriers. They were building an entire system. Carriers, aircraft, pilots, mechanics, fuel, ordnance, spare parts, all flowing from an industrial and training base that Japan could not match or attack. Consider the logistics. Each Essex-Class carrier burns 400 tons of fuel oil per day at cruising speed, more at flank speed. Each carries 90 aircraft that collectively consume thousands of gallons of aviation fuel daily during operations. Ammunition expenditure during a single day of intense combat operations can run to hundreds of tons. Anti-aircraft shells, bombs, torpedoes, bullets. Traditional naval operations required carriers to return to port regularly to refuel, rearm, and replenish supplies. This limited their operational range and flexibility. The Americans solved this problem with a logistics innovation as revolutionary as the carriers themselves. Underway replenishment, fleet oilers, ammunition ships, and supply vessels accompany the carrier task forces. At sea, in the open ocean, these support ships come alongside the carriers. Hoses are connected, fuel flows. Pallets of ammunition and supplies are transferred via cable. The carrier never stops moving. The operation takes hours rather than the days required for a port visit. This capability extends the American carrier's striking range indefinitely. Task Force 58, the Fast Carrier Task Force, operates continuously for months without returning to port. Carriers steam from the Central Pacific to the Philippines, to Okinawa, to Japan itself, refueling and rearming at sea. Japanese bases cannot be safe because American carriers can strike anywhere, anytime, and sustain operations indefinitely. Japan lacks this capability. Japanese carriers must return to port to refuel and rearm. This limits their operational flexibility and makes them vulnerable during transit to and from bases. Japanese supply ships are also vulnerable to American submarines, which wage unrestricted warfare against Japanese merchant shipping. By 1944, moving supplies by sea within Japanese-controlled waters became increasingly dangerous. The submarine campaign represents another dimension of American industrial superiority. The United States Navy commissioned 203 submarines during the war. These submarines sink over 50% of Japanese merchant shipping, nearly 5 million tons. They also sank 1 battleship, 8 carriers, and 11 cruisers of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Japan commissioned 130 submarines during the same period. Japanese submarines sink few merchant ships. Their primary mission is attacking warships and achieve limited success against American naval forces. American anti-submarine warfare, employing destroyer escorts built in the hundreds, proves devastatingly effective. By late 1944, the cumulative effect of American industrial production became overwhelming. Japan's navy, which began the war as one of the most powerful in the world, is reduced to a hollow shell. Fuel shortages mean ships cannot sail for training or operations. Pilot losses mean carrier decks sit nearly empty. Production bottlenecks mean new ships commission without adequate fire control systems or radar. Entire fleet units become immobile, conserving fuel, waiting for a final battle that never comes on terms favorable to Japan. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 represents Japan's last attempt to employ its carrier force effectively. 4 carriers, Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda, are assigned as decoys to lure American carriers away from the landing beaches at Leyte. The plan requires the Japanese carriers to be so obviously threatening that the Americans must pursue them. The Japanese carriers carry approximately 100 aircraft total between all 4 ships. They are not threatening, they are bait. And they succeed in their mission. American carriers pursue them northward, but the cost is absolute. All 4 Japanese carriers are sunk. Japan's carrier force ceases to exist as an effective fighting force. The Americans at Leyte Gulf deploy 16 fleet carriers, 16 Essex-Class and light carriers, carrying over 1,000 aircraft, supported by dozens of escort carriers operating hundreds more planes. The numerical disparity is so overwhelming that individual American carrier groups possess more striking power than the entire Japanese carrier force. Commander Omei, reading the battle reports in Tokyo, drafts a memo that will never be officially filed. He writes, "We are not fighting a nation. We are fighting an industrial system that treats 30,000-ton warships as mass-produced articles of commerce, building them with the efficiency that we might build trucks. We calculated their shipyard capacity correctly. We measured their steel production accurately. We assessed their skilled labor force thoroughly. All our intelligence was correct. What we failed to understand was that they would rebuild their entire economy around warship production, that they would train new workers in months to do jobs that require years to learn, that they would invent new methods of construction that violate traditional shipbuilding practice but somehow work. We were not wrong about what was possible. We were wrong about what the Americans would consider acceptable." The memo remains in Omei's papers, unsubmitted. There is no point. The war is already lost. The only question remaining is how long until Japan accepts the inevitable. By spring of 1945, American carrier task forces operated in Japanese home waters with impunity. They strike Tokyo. They strike Kobe, Osaka, and Nagoya. They bombard coastal targets with naval gunfire. They sweep the seas of remaining Japanese shipping. They control the air, the surface, and the undersea environment completely. The kamikaze attacks, Japan's last desperate tactical innovation, inflict casualties and damage but cannot alter the strategic situation. Kamikaze pilots dive their bomb-laden aircraft into American ships, achieving hits through suicidal determination that conventional attacks cannot match. They damage dozens of ships. They sink several. But they cannot sink enough. For every ship damaged, replacements arrive from American shipyards. For every sailor killed, trained replacements come forward. The mathematics of attrition favor the side that can replace losses indefinitely. USS Bunker Hill, CV-17, is hit by two kamikaze aircraft on May 11, 1945. Fires rage. Nearly 400 men die. The carrier is knocked out of the war, but 15 other Essex-Class carriers remain operational. The task force continues operations without pause. By August of 1945, the American Pacific Fleet included 19 Essex-Class carriers in frontline service. 5 more are completing workups or repairs. The United States Navy possesses more carrier striking power concentrated in the Pacific than the combined carrier forces of all nations in 1941. Japan has no carriers operational. 0. The last Japanese carrier, Hosho, a small, obsolete vessel from the 1920s, sits in port, disarmed, used for transport. The Naval General Staff cannot even contemplate carrier operations. There are no pilots trained in carrier operations. There is no fuel to conduct training. There is no point. August 6, 1945. The atomic bomb destroys Hiroshima. August 9th, the second bomb destroys Nagasaki. August 15th, Emperor Hirohito addresses the Japanese nation by radio, announcing surrender. The war is over. The surrender ceremony is scheduled for September 2nd aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Admiral Nimitz, commanding the Pacific Fleet, orders a display of force, a demonstration of the industrial might that defeated Japan. Every available carrier is ordered to Tokyo Bay. September 2nd, 1945. Commander Toshikazu Omei boards the USS Missouri for the surrender ceremony. As his motor launch approaches the battleship, he sees the carriers: Essex, Yorktown, Intrepid, Hornet, Franklin, Ticonderoga, Randolph, Lexington, Bunker Hill, Wasp, Hancock, Bennington, Boxer, Bonhomme, Richard, Antietam, 15 Essex-Class carriers, plus the light carriers, plus the escort carriers providing air patrol. The horizon is filled with grey hulls. Each one represents something his intelligence assessments declared impossible. Each one carries the name of a lost American ship or a Revolutionary War battle, names chosen to symbolize American resilience and historical memory. Each one floats as evidence of industrial capacity beyond Japan's ability to match or even comprehend. A Japanese naval officer standing near Omei whispers, "How did they build so many?" Omei has spent 4 years attempting to answer that question. His reports fill filing cabinets in the Navy Ministry. His calculations, his projections, his intelligence assessments all wrong, all based on correct data and sound reasoning that nonetheless failed to predict reality. They decided to. Omei finally responds. It is not a satisfactory answer. It is the only answer. The surrender ceremony proceeds. General MacArthur accepts the Japanese surrender. Admiral Nimitz signs for the United States. Foreign Minister Shigemitsu signs for Japan, his hand shaking slightly as he affixes his signature to the instrument of surrender. The war is over. Omei departs the Missouri, returning to Japanese custody, to occupation, to a defeated nation. Behind him, the impossible fleet sits at anchor. 24 Essex-Class fleet carriers completed. 9 more under construction. Never finished because the war ended before they were needed. 33 carriers total planned, built, or partially built in 52 months. Japan built 6 carriers in the same period. The ratio, 5.5 to 1. But the ratio understates the disparity because Japanese carriers were smaller, carried fewer aircraft, and were less survivable. In terms of effective combat power, the ratio approaches 10-1 or higher. After the war, American naval intelligence conducted extensive interviews with surviving Japanese naval officers. The interviews seek to understand Japanese decision-making, strategic planning, and intelligence assessments. When asked about the Essex-Class program, Admiral Koshiro Oikawa, who served as Navy Minister, provides testimony that enters the historical record. "We calculated that America would need to choose priorities: build carriers, or build tanks and aircraft for Europe, or build merchant ships for supplying Britain and later for invasion operations. We believed they could not do all three at maximum capacity simultaneously. Our calculations showed that doing all three was unprecedented. We were correct that it was unprecedented. We were incorrect that unprecedented meant impossible. They chose not to choose. They did everything." The statistical record supports Oikawa's admission. American war production from 1942 through 1945. 24 Essex-Class fleet carriers, 9 Independence-class light carriers, over 100 escort carriers, 349 destroyers, 203 submarines, 952 other major combatants including cruisers, destroyer escorts, and amphibious vessels. Simultaneously, 88,000 tanks, 324,000 aircraft, 64,000 landing craft, 5,777 merchant ships totaling over 38 million tons, total tonnage of naval and merchant shipping over 53 million tons. Japanese production in the same period, approximately 1.8 million tons of naval and merchant shipping combined. The ratio, nearly 30-1. These numbers are not projections or estimates. They are historical facts, documented in production records, commissioning ceremonies, and ship registries. Every vessel listed was built, launched, commissioned, and served. Most survived the war. Many served for decades afterward. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.